Hello, my name's Fran Stovald and I'd like to welcome you to the Sporting Heritage Conference 2022. This year we're running a series of conference webinars which will explore how the spheres of sport and heritage intersect. In this session, we're looking at the challenges and opportunities that are facing both heritage and sporting organisations over the coming year. I'd like to hand over, with no more of ado, to our chair for this session, Dr Justine Reilly. Over to you, Justine.
Thanks, Fran. So hello, I'm Justine. I'm the Director of Sporting Heritage. We are the Subject Specialist Network for sport across the 4 UK nations, and we're a CIC, a social enterprise and a membership organisation. Our remit is to protect, preserve, provide access to and celebrate sporting heritage and support all the hundreds of organisations that either have collections or look after collections or want to work with collections to develop them. We deliver a range of programming, including National Sporting Heritage Day, Sport and Art Month, the Sporting Heritage Awards. We have a community grants programme to support grassroots to develop their activity and change the way that sporting heritage is developed and works. We deliver a national conference in various different ways, sometimes digitally, sometimes in person. We have a workforce development programme, and we also deliver lots of bespoke one-to-one support and consultancy support where people need it. All with that kind of aim to help the people who are looking after those collections be able to access what they need. Over the last 3 years, it's been challenging and exciting in terms of our shift and development as an organisation. We've been able to see lots of impact and outputs for some of the work that we've been doing in terms of diversifying the understanding of what sporting heritage is about, what organisations can do and deliver their sport and heritage activity. And we've delivered programmes that have been looking and funded by National Lottery, Sport England, Art Fund, all really starting to evidence why these collections are so important for so many different reasons. And our next steps is a National Lottery Resilience Programme, where we're looking at how, as an organisation, can we be more robust going into the future so that we can support the sector that we represent. And this session is really, really crucial to our development because it's looking forward and it's thinking about where are the gaps in what is happening for the sector at the moment, and what are those opportunities that exist. And as a subject specialist network, that's part of our role, to understand what you as a sector need us to be doing to help you do your work better. So I'm really excited to be talking to the panel and to be listening to everybody and hearing more about where we can go in the future and how that can inform our strategic plan and our development, and ultimately how that can support the sector and the audiences that we work with. So I'm going to hand over to the panel members to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their work and the activity that they're delivering, and then we'll have a discussion looking at the ways forward and the things that we can be considering and thinking about next. So first of all, I'd like to hand over to Becky Bowd from Heritage Quay, who's the University Archivist. Becky.
Hi, thanks so much, Justine. Just bear with me while I share my screen. Great, so thanks so much for inviting me to take part in today. My name's Dr Becky Bowd. I'm the University Archivist for Heritage Quay, and that's the Archives and Records Management Service for the University of Huddersfield. Today I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we offer in terms of archives, what we look after, some of the work we undertake on digital preservation, a bit about our spaces and the exhibitions that we run, as well as a vital part of the work that we do, and that is public engagement. So archives, I just thought I'd begin by saying what archives are. I'm not necessarily sure many of the people watching this will know what they are. So archives are collections of physical or digital documents or records which have been selected for permanent preservation because of their value as evidence or as a source for historical or other research. They're often in the form of a written record, but they can exist in many formats, including paper, parchment, books, photographs, audiovisual and digital materials. So for instance, emails, or even this PowerPoint could be considered an archive. At Heritage Quay, it's worth saying we also hold a lot of mixed material that you'd normally expect to find in museums, such as textiles, clothing and objects. And we have a lot of trophies and medals among our collections. So talking of our collections, We have over 160 archives and special collections, which equate to over 650,000 unique items. These span from the 17th century to the present day. Our collections fall into 7 main themes. Sport is one of our big collecting areas, and we have 3 internationally significant collections covering England netball, World Netball and Rugby League. We also hold some cricket collections that document the history of cricket in Yorkshire. We also hold music, politics, education, theatre and performance, art and design and literature collections. We also regularly take in new additions to existing collections. For instance, earlier this year, we collected the Julia Lee collection, and that was added to the Rugby Football League archive. It provides a really valuable perspective on women in the sport, and the collections had a lot of media attention and was covered by the BBC. Our main aim at Heritage Quay is to provide access to our archives to everyone. We have a variety of users, including current and past students, members of staff, academics, and members of the public. They usually get in touch with us via email or phone. We make archives accessible by sorting, arranging, and cataloguing them on our collections management system, CALM, and this forms the basis of our searchable public-facing online catalogue, which is available via our website, heritagequay.org. Our catalogues are also available via national online portals such as Archives Hub, and will soon be available via the National Archives Discovery online search facility. In terms of visiting us at Heritage Quay, we offer in-person appointments to anyone in our research room on Mondays and Tuesdays, or online appointments at other times via Microsoft Teams. What is the point of us collecting archives if they can't be made accessible? We also offer a chargeable research service and copying services if you can't visit us in person. So we do a lot of work with current students as we offer archive inductions to new students as part of their induction week and as part of modules. We also offer student placements as part of work experience modules and recruit paid student helpers who help us keep the space tidy, shelve and retrieve items, and undertake basic but essential archival work. We also work with lots of volunteers. Thinking of our sporting collections, we work really closely with the Women in Rugby League project. There are a number of volunteers currently cataloguing Julia Lee's collection, for instance, and we also work very closely with the Netball Heritage and Archives group, who have helped put together the England Netball Archive. Another key part of our work is digital preservation. We have all sorts of formats that we have to preserve digitally. These include audio, video, email, images, and so much more. We have nearly 7 terabytes of material on our digital preservation server. This amounts to about 310,000 different files in 65 collections. So there's a lot to manage. Some of our largest collections are the British Music Collection, that's scores and recordings from 20th century composers, the British Dance Bands Collection, that has over 19,000 digitised tracks that you can listen to via our online catalogue. England Netball, one of our major sports collections, has lots of films that they've recently digitised from VHS. And we also have the Micron Theatre Company archive, and that's quite heavily digital archive, as is our own university's collection. Something else that we do at Heritage Quay, and it's really important to us as an archive service, is public engagement. As I mentioned earlier, it's at the core of what we do. What would we be without anyone coming to view the archive? So we offer workshops and events, often in partnership with students, academics, and the public. And we also have an exhibition space and run lots of exhibitions. Our space is open 6 days a week, Monday to Saturday. Our current exhibition, the Rugby League World Cup exhibition, is on until the 22nd of December. And you've got a sneak peek at the exhibition on this slide. So please do come and see us. And that's everything from me. So thank you so much for letting me introduce myself.
Thank you so much, Becky. I mean, some of the collections that you hold are really important in terms of women's sport as well, and starting to diversify those, the collections and the stories that are being told. And just looking at that digital catalogue and seeing what you have there, wow. It shows often that difference as well in terms of how collections exist and the difference between museums and archives, and yeah, a big job.
Yeah, very much
you.
so. Thanks.
So now I'm going to hand over to David Freestone, who's a Collections and Research Officer at Silverstone Interactive Museum.
Okay, hello. Yeah, Collections and Research Officer at Silverstone Interactive Museum. To give you a bit of background on Silverstone Circuit, where we are based, the circuit was first used as a racetrack in 1948. The roads and everything that were built for it were built as an RAF base in 1943, and it was RAF Silverstone. And that brings us to where we're based at the circuit, which is in the last World War II hangar remaining on the site. So the project we have done to make the Silverstone Interactive Museum is funded by the HLF and included rebuilding and refurbishing the hangar on the site, and that is part of why we were awarded the Sporting Heritage Network Museum and Archives Awards earlier in the year that we're very honoured to receive. So we also hold archives at the museum. So we have brand new storage facilities that looks after the British Racing Drivers Club archive, who are the owners of the circuit. But we also started our own Silverstone Heritage Limited Collection, which looks at as outside the racing as well. We collect with the local area, record oral histories, that sits under that. And we've also started housing other collections, such as the British Racing Motors collection. They're the first British Formula One team, and they're now housed in our archives as well. So as mentioned, we restored the World War II hangar that's on the site, and we also interpret the site as well as having the sort of traditional museum exhibition in the hangar itself. So to start with, we have had some interpretation panels when we opened in October 3 years ago out on the site. Earlier this year, we added to that by adding a sort of heritage app that you could use whilst going around our heritage track trail out by Silverstone Circuit to get a bit more information, interact with some of our archive content, oral history interviews whilst you're out by the track side. And this winter, we're going to start doing heritage tours of the site whilst the track is closed in December. People will get the chance to go on a guided tour on a bus on the track and see some of the bits of the site that people don't normally get to see. And this is all part of our mission of our HLF funding to interpret the whole site and preserve the history of the circuit. As well as our museum aims, we also have an education program. We've had 9,000 education visits this year, and we've had about 5,000 outreach children reached on visits as well. And I think that is the main part of what I wanted to cover. But yeah, that's us at Silverstone.
Oh, it's brilliant. And it's right what you're saying about how unique it is as a site, and it's been maybe a year or so since I've been, but it's brilliant to experience it and see the collections and then see the track. And yeah, and I'm quite excited about what you're saying about the tour bus as well. I can imagine that's going to really help connect people with what you do. Thanks, David. So now I'm going to hand over to Andrew Hignell, who is from the CC4 Museum of Welsh Cricket.
Thanks, Justine. Prynhawn a chroeso i'r Amgueddfa Genedlaethol Cricket Cymru. That's the Welsh bit out of the way, but lovely to be taking part again with Sporting Heritage. I just want to give you a quick thumbnail sketch of our background and then also tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in the course of the last 6 months, which actually have been our busiest ever, despite the fact that we are emerging from the COVID restrictions. Up until the year 2005, I was a teacher of historical geography, although my students thought it was more hysterical sometimes than historical. I then came back to where I was brought up here in Cardiff as a Glamorgan cricket person, helped to oversee aspects of the stadium development. Of course, we hosted the first Ashes test of the 2009 series, first time ever that England had played Australia, but not in England and not in Australia, proudly here in Wales. We had a large grant from the Heritage Lottery Fund as well as Visit Wales, and we were able to fully open 2 years later in 2011. In 2017, we became the first fully accredited cricket museum in the UK. And in the course of the last few years, we've won several awards for our use of IT and technology, which I'm glad to say is holding up today. And of course, I mustn't forget that last year as well, we were given an award for our volunteering work from Sporting Heritage. And I know the volunteers who work here, who give up their time to help, were delighted by the recognition. I just want to flesh out 4 areas just to give you some background of our work, especially in the last 6 months. They have been our busiest ever, with in the region of we have been dealing with in the region of 15,000 young people. When I say young people, that's not just school children, that's university students. And in fact, only a couple of weeks ago, we had our annual visit from sports marketing and development students from the University of Basel in Switzerland. We have postgraduate students from Cardiff University and Cardiff Metropolitan University regularly making visits here. I just want to quickly touch on 4 key areas which have helped us emerge from the COVID restrictions. I don't like the word challenge, I like the word opportunity. I think that's a better synonym. And in particular, what's happened is that we have been developing some learning packages and some exhibitions here in the museum on some new themes. Obviously, the topics of well-being, both physical and mental, are important. I should stress that we are located here at the headquarters of Glamorgan Cricket. Just behind me is a large indoor school where every child, student who visits the museum gets an opportunity to play. And for the children who've been here today in the museum, they were in half of the hall, with the Glamorgan professional cricketers in the other half. And very, very exciting for them. But we've been encouraged by the Welsh Government to develop some packages on well-being as well as diet and nutrition. For obvious reasons, the ministers down at the Senedd in Cardiff Bay are concerned about issues such as obesity. So we are delivering some important messages there. Secondly, staffing. During the COVID restrictions, we actually were able to recruit more volunteers, and people I've now got 16 volunteers, and we've in fact increased our tour guide and museum staffing now up to 6. We've been lucky enough to recruit students from Cardiff University who've been helping us with quite a few conservation issues. We were lucky enough, I can now publicly say, that we acquired 2.5 years ago letters from the world's greatest cricketer, not a Glamorgan player, I might add, but Don Bradman from Australia. And the students were able to do transcriptions, they were able to give condition assessments. The letters are now in the safe archives down at Glamorgan Archives, and we have a selection on display here. And on National Sporting Heritage Day, we launched that. We've had a steady stream of visitors coming in to learn about the link between a club cricketer in Wales and the world's greatest ever batter. So it's really nice that we're able to say some really nice personal stories. That's been possible because, as I say, of the team of conservation volunteers. We've also been able to enhance our website thanks to a grant from the Museums Federation of Wales. And we have been able to be far more interactive. We've been very lucky enough to have weekly podcasts, blogs. The digitization program has continued, and it's given us a wealth of material as we move into this brave new world post-COVID. Another thing which has been quite fortuitous for us is that the BBC here in Cardiff have moved their headquarters from near Llandaff Cathedral to the north of the city, right into the heart of the city. They've got a brand new building, very much 21st century, rather than something that was post-Second World War. What's happened is they've been able to go through a lot of their archives, and they have unearthed some films, not just cricket, but rugby, football, various other things. They don't know what they are. And so some of my volunteers have been able to liaise there. We have been given, and in fact, I did an evening Zoom talk, which is on the museum's YouTube channel. We were given a 20-minute, an absolutely priceless 20-minute black and white interview, which the doyen of cricket broadcasters, John Arlott, made way back in 1967 with a man called Norman Riches, who was our first ever captain when Glamorgan became a first-class county in 1921. These films have been lying idle in Broadcasting House in Llandaff, and BBC thankfully have allowed us to have them safely on display on our new museum website. So it's absolutely fantastic. That's very fortuitous. And to have such rich material, we have been able also, the final point I just wanted to mention, is the funding. And again, through the Welsh Government, they have released 2 grants which we were told to apply for, and that was very nice. So we've been involved in something called the Winter of Wellbeing, links back to my first point, and something called Summer of Fun. Now, Summer of Fun was a spin-off really from Kids in Museums, but both of the grants have allowed us to have new exhibitions. They were both specifically for collaborations with schools. The first one, Winter of Wellbeing, we decided to go down in EDI focus. So cricket is the game for me, me, and me. We worked with quite a few schools with a very high South Asian clientele, but we also, bearing in mind we are the Museum of Welsh Cricket, we also dealt with some Welsh medium schools. And the comments from visitors who've come to the museum over the cricket season is how nice it is to see artwork and other displays, both in Welsh and in a variety of other dialects. So the children translated, we've got something like 32 different languages that were spoken by all the children who came in. And so we've got the word cricket in 32 different languages, which is wonderful. And Summer of Fun has actually allowed us to go out to one of the lost cricket grounds in Cardiff. It's a rugby ground, but it used to be a cricket ground. Believe it or not, Cardiff City played one of their first matches there way back in 1909. And we've got some archive photos, which fortuitously have come to us. And finally, very sadly, one of the young boys who played cricket and rugby and hockey at this lost cricket ground, we've worked with the school that he went to. Sadly, in 1914, he joined up with the Royal Flying Corps. 1917, his body was he was killed in a crash over Belgium. Only last year, his body was identified by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and we've worked with them. So it's a new collaboration, and it was very poignant. There was a rededication service in June. The material for the Order of Service, the only known photo at the time of him was of him in his cricket gear, because he played once the final game that Glamorgan played before the First World War in 1914. As a result of our work with the Summer of Fun, we have acquired now 30 new photos of the sports teams, and he appears on 14 of them. And it's been very moving to deal with his family, who now have got photos of him as a child as well as an adult. So I think you can see why I'm saying 2022 hasn't really been a year of challenges. For us, it's been a year of fantastic opportunities.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrew. Wow. I mean, so many things I think we're going to touch on when we talk later, but that's demonstrating the power of the stories, and that sport cuts across so many different parts of society that we might not necessarily think. The volunteers work that you have there, it's phenomenal. And then those partnerships and digitization and looking at those new opportunities, you've properly been able to grasp those because of how you were set before. You know, it must be said, you know, you were really thinking about all those different things before, but you've been able to then shift that, and it's brilliant to hear that it's working and working really well for you. I'm going to now hand over to Jacob O'Sullivan from Museums Galleries Scotland. Jacob.
Hi, yeah, thanks very much for having me here, and it's just been great to hear some of the introductions so far. I think it's fascinating. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, that's good. Sometimes my microphone's a bit funny. But yeah, I'm just going to give a quick introduction really to myself and to the work of Museums Galleries Scotland. So I'm Jacob O'Sullivan. My role is Museum Development Manager of Collections and Interpretation at Museums Galleries Scotland. And Museums Galleries Scotland is the national development body for the museums and galleries sector within Scotland. So slightly different, I suppose, from other members of the panel in that we're not a museum or heritage organisation in that respect, but we are working nationally across Scotland in support of museums and heritage bodies. We work in support of over 430 museums and galleries across Scotland, which stretch throughout the country from Gretna in the far southwest up to Unst, which is the most northerly inhabited part of the British Isles in the far north of Shetland. And we are based in our offices in Edinburgh, but we obviously have a national remit. We support primarily through strategic investment, but also through advice and advocacy on behalf of the museum sector, as well as things like skills development and workforce development as well. We are MGS, we are an independent charity, and we receive core funding from the Scottish Government. And this also allows us to be a funder for museums and galleries within Scotland. And our funding is hopefully quite useful in that it's, like I say, it's reserved for basically the museum sector, the museums and galleries sector across Scotland, and for collections work and community engagement work and things like this for the museum sector more widely. All of our work is underpinned by the national strategy for Scotland's museums and galleries, which currently is called Going Further, but which is the new one is being consulted on. And this underpins kind of the approach that we take in support of museums and galleries across the country. We have current priorities which are informed by this, which are really what we're hoping to help museums achieve through funding and advice. So sector resilience is a big priority for us, and this is about us supporting the museum sector to develop sustainable models and to adapt to new ways of working. And I think that'll be really relevant in kind of considering some of the issues today. As well as responding to the climate emergency. So this is about directly responding to this and promoting an environmental sustainability that enables the museum sector to make a full contribution to reaching net zero by 2045. This is one of our priorities. Also workforce development, so to increase the skills of the museum workforce, whether staff or volunteers across the sector, and to address and deal with barriers to joining the museum workforce. more widely. And also, of course, improving digital capacity. As part of our workforce development, really trying to look at increasing digital literacy and the ability for museums and galleries to kind of engage with communities and share their collections through digital platforms as well. All of our work is done ideally through a kind of a collaborative approach, and we're very interested in building partnerships across the sector and developing brokering new partnerships and relationships, and this really is how we work primarily with groups such as Sporting Heritage as well, because we work very closely with the subject specialist networks. And any subject specialist network that has representation in a museum in Scotland, we will work with and try to support as far as we can as well. We've recently been doing a lot of work on decolonisation of museums and galleries more widely, and also of ensuring that we look at underrepresented narratives within museums and galleries, and trying to address these and encourage museums and galleries to explore these narratives. All of this is done through a commitment to anti-racism, and we've recently completed or gone through the Empire, Slavery in Scotland's Museums project, and we're looking at working according to the recommendations from this as we speak. As well as our work with subject specialist networks, we work to support geographical museums forums. So these are geographical groupings of museums which are linked by where they are, and work to support these groupings and get a good understanding of regional issues affecting different museum groups. We also support new and emerging museums as far as possible, and we run the two standard schemes within the museum sector in Scotland of accreditation and recognition. So museum accreditation, we run accreditation in Scotland, and we do this in collaboration with partners in England, Wales and Northern Ireland as well. It's obviously a UK-wide accreditation scheme. And we also run the recognition scheme, which is a Scotland-specific scheme, which is a way of the Scottish Government way of them formally recognising and investing in museum collections which are of national significance, but which are held out with the national museums and national galleries. And several sporting collections are recognised collections, such as the Scottish Football Museum and the Shinty collection of the Highland Folk Museum, for example. So they are quite well represented through this network. We also run a knowledge exchange series, which is a way of us trying to bring interesting big conversations to the museum sector. So there are quite a few of these good resources on our website as well. And I think that is all I wanted to do by way of an introduction, but it's great to be a member of the panel today, and great to see you all as well. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jacob. As you may or may not have noticed, my connection keeps dropping in and out. So I'm going to cross my fingers that everything is fine for the next half an hour while we continue our panel discussion. So that's amazing and brilliant to hear the work that you're all doing, and at Museums Galleries Scotland, the support that you have for the sector is brilliant, and your recognition and understanding of where sport fits in has been evident throughout your support for what we're doing there and what the network is doing in Scotland. So it's brilliant to hear more about how you're working. So for the next 25 minutes, we're going to discuss what are those key kind of opportunities, challenges, things that we need to think about in terms of a sector working with sporting heritage. So obviously we're coming out of COVID, and that has impacted, not necessarily always in negative ways, but I wanted to throw it out to the panel, and we've heard from all of you in terms of the work that you're doing, and it seems like there's amazing stuff that's happening, but I'm sure there are things that you wish were happening better, or things that were there to support better. And so my question for you is, what are those opportunities or challenges that you think we should now be harnessing as a sporting heritage sector that we potentially might not be or might not have thought about? It's a massive big question, but I'm going to put it out there. Who would like to go first? I'll call on someone. Becky, would you like to go first?
Yeah, it was a big question. I was going to try and take a minute to think about it while someone else spoke, but that's absolutely fine. I mean, I guess for me, it's both a challenge and an opportunity, which is around volunteers in the sector of sport and heritage. I think traditionally we've certainly relied on, as a lot of the GLAM sector does, on volunteer support to undertake kind of basic repackaging, conservation and cataloguing work. And it's, I think for us, there's been quite a change possibly in that normally we'd get a lot of inquiries about volunteering and a lot of interest in volunteering. And that's actually something where in some ways we've been struggling to recruit in a way that pre-pandemic we would have expected not to have those issues. And I think partly it's that people have changed their habits. And if we think about many of the volunteers and in terms of you know, age, and they are in kind of perhaps slightly more at risk groups and perhaps less, their habits have changed a lot more, so not wanting to participate in quite the same way as perhaps they did pre-COVID. Everyone, like I said, everyone's priorities have changed. I certainly don't have half the social life I did before the pandemic. So I think that's, in thinking particularly, I mean, across all collections, but sporting collections, you know, we rely so much on the volunteer sector, whether it might be, you know, I've already mentioned kind of the Women in Rugby League project, and we've had volunteers helping with that, watching video footage, identifying players, digitising, collections cataloguing, and same with the Netball Heritage and Archives group, who undertake vital work for us. But in that instance, they are based all over the country, and so it's actually quite difficult to get everyone back together kind of in one room. And so that's one of the challenges. But I think the opportunity around that is there's so much more opportunity now, perhaps for engagement digitally with volunteers. Obviously there was some kind of major mass observation projects over the and digitisation and projects over the pandemic that really has meant that we're now, I think, as a sector, so much more geared up for helping, for running these projects kind of virtually. And that's something that we at Heritage Quay certainly intend on, I guess, investing more in. That hopefully helps answer the question and maybe opens up some discussion for others.
No, it's brilliant. I'll probably put you on the spot there. No, I mean, volunteers are absolutely central. I mean, they're central to heritage activity anyway, but I think in sporting heritage we definitely see it. And that knowledge of our collections often comes from outside of heritage itself. And we can't underestimate how important that is.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. We have relied so much on the volunteers because, you know, we've got over 160 collections. We are not experts in every single collection. We can't be. That's not our role. We're there to be the holders of these collections on behalf of kind of other organisations. And that knowledge, you know, it's with the volunteers, it's with the subject experts. And many of these volunteers have worked in the sector themselves, worked for sporting organisations, and their love and passion has led them to volunteer. So definitely.
Yeah, great point. So volunteers, I think, is like a crucial kind of where do volunteers sit? And Andrew, you touched on that as well, didn't you, in terms of volunteers being crucial to what you're doing?
Absolutely. And the thing there is remote volunteers, people have had more time at home. I'm going to put the flip side to that in a minute, but I'll be glass half full first of all. But the fact that people have been able to work from their home, the fact that there's so much more material now, sports heritage based online, the fact that even things like ancestry, other website's also highly recommended. But people can do that sort of research rather than I could, when I was way back in the early 1980s doing the PhD, where I'd have to go up to Somerset House, and now I can do something in 2 minutes that would possibly take 2 days. But the flip side of home working is that people probably have spent more time at home and have been going down to item number 99 on their must-do list, which is sorting out the loft or sorting out the garage. And one of the negatives for us is that we have become a little bit of a dumping ground, and people have been sorting out sort of the feng shui in their homes. So the flip side is that people have been clearing out their homes, and we've become a little bit of a dumping ground. And what it's meant is that we've luckily had the volunteers in to do cataloguing, to do bibliographies. We've also got everything going on to modes, but unfortunately, in order to do that properly, you need to have face-to-face meetings, and to try and organize 16 volunteers all coming in at the same time. So we have got a massive backlog simply because of the face-to-face bits that we've missed. So that's the first thing. Second thing, I think a huge challenge, I said about positives with funding, but what's going to happen in 3 or 4 years' time? Obviously we're talking today after the autumnal budget, and I'm looking forward to watching the news tonight on TV to find out the implications. But belts will be tightened. We're going into a recession, and I just hope that the people in the corridors of power look upon sports heritage in a positive way. Obviously, that's my big plug for Wales in the World Cup coming up. But isn't it great that England have got a world champions in cricket last weekend? I'm sure they'll do well in rugby. And the more prominence that is given to the national sporting teams, the men and the women, and all of the disabled teams, great to see, Ellie Simmons, even if it's on Strictly Come Dancing, but it's the high profile, never mind Tony Adams, but it's all those things, so that it's in the national psyche, as it were. But I would just agree with what Becky said, that in order to survive in the medium term, you have to have an online presence. And with that come technological challenges. You need to have IT support. And if you've got remote volunteers, you've got to hope that they've got their antivirus software and everything else is up to date. Scanners are not cheap. And all those digitization things and digital cameras, if you're going for a high quality TIFF or a GIF or a JPEG, you need people to have the equipment. So there are benefits of remote volunteering and home working, but there are some technological and financial challenges. And I just hope that we as a sector can overcome that, and this momentum, almost like a tsunami wave coming in of funding, is not then going to level off and we're back to a mill pond in the future.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll come back to you again in a minute, Becky. But I kind of feel that what you're saying there around the funding and the capacity it's crucial, and it's crucial before COVID, and it's crucial now, and that isn't going to change. It's only going to become, as we expand the knowledge of what sporting heritage collections out there and make sure that they're more diverse, there's going to be more need for bigger capacity and more volunteers and more support. And when we talk about digital knowledge and equipment, sometimes that can be costly, and it can be costly to train people and to have people understand how to use it, and all of those things cost that money. And in terms of us and where I'm thinking where we fit within that, it's that demonstrating the impact, because ultimately that funding is coming through because we're saying, look at the impact of what these collections do against all of your agendas, whether they be local, whether they be national, economic, tourism, education. We know anecdotally what a difference we make. The more we can start being able to demonstrate that in facts and figures and equating it to economic outputs, for example, I think the more we can start to really build our case and do everything we can so that it doesn't drop off. Because I'm with you, I'm kind of like, this is crucial now. We're seeing like a really head of steam of these collections being celebrated, understood and recognised that they're part of heritage. But there's a real danger as things bite and we start to think, well, where are the cuts going to come, that could stop. And we're about the audiences, we're about the people. Somebody said that earlier on, we're about, you know, making sure that we're relevant, and that comes at a cost. Sorry, Becky.
Oh, it was just good. Thanks. It was just in response to a couple of points that Andrew had made that I thought I think the first one was about you know, going through lost and attics during you know, lockdown. We've I'm sure others have noticed as well, we've certainly noticed a big increase in the number of collections that we've been offered, and particularly in relation to sporting collections. Obviously, I've already mentioned in my initial introduction about kind of the Women in Rugby League collections that we've really been focusing on recently. And that also really links with the point Andrew was making as well about the visibility and profile of the sport. Obviously, at the moment, we're just coming to the end of the Rugby League World Cup, but that's made a really significant difference to us in terms of, you know, raising the profile of the collections of rugby league that we hold, not only the those of Rugby Football League, the national body, and those administrative records, but also, you know, those individual player collections, whether it be women, you know, wheelchair rugby players, or the men's game as well. And I think that, you know, there's such a correlation there with that importance and significance of, you know, the profile of the sport being mainstream. Like, it's the first time that I think ever that all of the World Cup games have ever been broadcast on the BBC. And just even my mum in Cambridge here, for instance, has been watching rugby league. My mum has never been interested in rugby league before. And I think that's just showing the reach that profile can have. And it's so important that that continues. And this just comes back to that point about, you know, finances and funding. Of course, it is a big risk because, you know, what's going to happen. I mean, my hope is that we would continue to build on all of these successes and kind of really showcase our sporting collections in relation to and linking with kind of, you know, TV coverage and investment on that side. But you don't know what's going to happen. And as with, you know, the points you've both made, I hope that we don't take a step back. We need to build on it. We need to maintain the momentum. You know, and for instance, the T20, you know, World Cup and the win there, you know, it's just brilliant. It just helps for kind of us as organisations just raise the profile of our collections so much in a way we'd never be able to achieve by ourselves.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, excellent points again in terms of like making sure that we keep that momentum going. And David or Jacob, would you like to come back? Anything to add?
Yeah, it's quite difficult for us to gauge sort of how COVID has affected us, because we were open sort of 6 months just before the first lockdown, so it's been quite hard. One of the difficulties for us has been trying to plan, particularly for this year, never really knowing how the amount of people coming through the door, what's actually representative. When we also talk about volunteers, has been quite an interesting one for us. We had quite a small core group of archive volunteers before we opened as a museum, and sort of sadly through COVID, they all decided they didn't want to come back to volunteer. So we've been on a bit of a journey with, we gained a lot of volunteers who work in the museum with guests, but we lost a lot of archive and collection volunteers. So we're sort of going on this journey of trying to diversify our sort of volunteer outputs, putting people with our education program, museum, and bringing people back to the archive as well. So it's been that's been quite an interesting challenge for us. Yeah,
you're right, David, of course, because you'd only just opened, hadn't you, when we went into lockdown, so it is a difficult time to work out, well, where do we fit in terms of those kind of figures and what we're doing. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see then how you're developing over the next couple of years. Yeah. And Jacob, did you yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, really interesting conversation so far, and I think you know, I would echo just a lot of that. It's difficult to not talk about COVID. You know, it was such a huge thing that happened, obviously to all of us, but thinking specifically about the museum sector, it had a huge impact in so many ways, and we're still really dealing with that. But I think a lot of the challenges that we are dealing with were there before COVID to an extent for museums anyway, and often it sort of sped it up and meant that as a sector, I mean, as a society, as I say, but we had to really look at this, you know, straight in the face. And I think what we saw really quite dramatically, and maybe trying to just find an opportunity from these challenges, was the need for museums to kind of pivot how they operate and what their role was for communities that they serve, and also for their role as kind of within tourism, things like this. So whenever museums started to be able to reopen again, what we found a lot of what had been happening was actually very positive in that, because communities had changed, because everybody was staying at home and everybody was kind of interacting differently during the lockdowns. People were able to kind of band together quite well, and quite often when a community is firmed up like that, you look to what is the central resource for this community, and quite often, and ideally, the ideal community resource is a museum or heritage centre. No matter how you identify your community to be, that there should be something like that there. And I think museums were really able to make the most of this and reposition themselves in some respects as brilliant community resources, which a lot we're already doing, but that just felt like that was truly understood in the kind of renewed context. And as well as this came hand in hand with obviously a change in tourism patterns and things like this. And actually this was kind of embraced at the time through, we had a Recovery and Resilience Fund, which was an emergency fund from the Scottish Government to deal with this and to try and encourage museums to pivot slightly, to reassess their role within the communities that they serve. And what I think is really interesting is that this potentially is carrying on now through the cost of living crisis and through the crisis of energy costs, because what museums are seeing is that not only are they having to be reflective of this crisis through the stories that they tell, but also through perhaps a continually changing role as a central community resource, as they're further understood as warm places, you know, things like this, places where people might come to learn and to feel less isolated, which is of course what museums have always been, but that feels really, really important right now. As well as doing this and having to capitalize on that, museums are also going through the same problems themselves. So stuff around obviously increased energy costs, things like this. And when, you know, energy costs, that feels really significant when you're thinking about, you know, a collection store, for example, and having to keep, you know, the temperature quite regular. And I think that is a particular challenge, but one that I think is almost a continual thing, like I say, from the impact of COVID originally, and this having to kind of reposition yourself and re-understand yourself as a central resource for communities, but also going through these challenges yourself, I think is quite difficult. Yeah, thank you. As well, sorry, I'll just say this obviously really affects, I think that was really interesting thinking about volunteer and workforce, and I think that really affects that. And I think kind of understanding the workforce of a museum, whether staff or volunteers or both, you know, understanding this workforce as being a kind of dialogue between museums and communities, as the volunteers make up the communities and the stakeholder groups of museums, is going to be really important as well moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. Andrew.
Yeah, there's one extra opportunity that has presented itself, I think, as a spin-off from people being at home, and also running parallel with various mental health issues. I was in a meeting earlier on today with some people from Alzheimer's Wales, and they were just talking about the opportunities that present themselves to capture forgotten stories, the fact that people are there with time on their hands, possibly coming together, as Jacob said, to a community centre, to be warm, to have a nice cup of tea, to have the kinship and the friendship. And I know Gloucestershire County Cricket Club have won an award recently for something called Talkers and Walkers. So people in Bristol have been going to the ground there. They've been calling into the Museum and Heritage Centre there. They've had a little bit of exercise, so that's the walking bit. And then they've done their little bit of talking and sharing stories. And I know here we are looking to build on that. But it is interesting. I was watching the coverage last week of the November the 11th reminiscence, and it's interesting, the BBC have started a project trying to capture as many memories of those soldiers who are still around from the various wars. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if you could expand that into sport? So I think if that military reminiscence works, then clearly there's opportunities for sports to say. And as you rightly said, Justine, sport covers every political colour. It's completely across society. One final thing very quickly, though, we mustn't forget the post-traumatic stress disorder, the PTSD opportunities with some of the veterans. And I was at on November the 5th, I was at the British Legion Festival of Remembrance here in Cardiff, and just chatting to some people there about the opportunities for people who've been very brave and now suffering a whole range of mental issues. But the thing that bonds them together is playing as a team, playing sport, and just remembering the good days. And I think that's something that we could trump if funding does get tight in the future.
Thank you both. I mean, yeah, absolutely, that opportunity for where what we do fits with mental health and well-being. I mean, we all know it, we see it, don't we? See the difference that makes and the potentials for how much more we could do going forward. I kind of feel that there's a huge opportunity there for us to support so many different people. And then what I really feel in terms of a development is ensuring that our audiences and the people that we're co-curating with and that are leading our activities, that it's a diverse and broad audience. I still feel that isn't happening at the moment, that as a sector we're still very much unable to share those ignored and hidden stories because we're still not quite able to make those partnerships work, and we need to do better at making that happen. And it's definitely something that we're trying to work on and shift how we do that. And I think it's something that we want to make sure that we drive forward to the sector, and volunteers and how volunteers interact with us, how we're able to support different volunteers is crucial part of that. I'm really conscious of time. We're just about to hit the hour mark. So before we finish, and I'm probably going to get told off for this, if anyone's got anything else they'd like to add, there's an urgent, what else do you think that we might not have covered? If there's anything that's a burning thing that we need to make sure that we're definitely thinking about going forward, you've got about 30 seconds each. If there's anything, now's your time. Andrew, are you off mute?
Yeah.
Are you ready to go?
I am. I think a national register of holdings. I'm interested by what Becky said, because I used to work with Dr. Peter Davis up at the University of Huddersfield with the cricket heritage of Calderdale and Kirklees, and they made fantastic strides forward in terms of like an inventory of what they've got. But I still think that there's massive scope for, and whether it's each nation, but just the list of what is already known, and where is it, who's got it. I know there's all, sometimes you don't want people, like we had with the Bradman letters, there are a few legal loopholes you've got to jump through, but it would be fantastic just if it was just a thumbnail sketch to say, we've got this collection, that collection, whatever, and to have that available nationally. Fantastic.
I think that's a brilliant idea. I think you should go and look at our database. Of collections, it needs to develop, but absolutely, and it needs to be, there's a capacity need in that as well, and we were talking about that the other day, that it's brilliant and it's growing and there's loads of different collections that are on there, but there's a capacity issue for people to know it exists or put their information on there, a real need. And that's I think you're absolutely right in terms of that drive. How do we do that so that it doesn't need to be lots of information, but just to kind of go, aha, okay, we've got a really good idea about what there is. Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. Anybody else? Jacob?
Yeah, I just, I'm not sure if I mentioned probably, but I just think it's really interesting to consider the massive range of stories that can be told with quite specific collections. And I think this has been touched on quite a lot in this session. And I think in the brilliant work that is done through this network, but and members, but the ability to look at different issues through sporting collections and to talk about underrepresented stories as well, and also just the act of bringing people together through sports stuff, I think is really, really positive. I was thinking of examples such as I remember being really moved by the way that I think it was the Scottish Football Museum were able to address stuff like sectarianism and things. I thought was really interesting and just a really interesting way in. And the Shinty collection of the Highland Folk Museum and kind of what can be done around identity building and kind of placemaking around quite interesting regional area specific sports like that, and also the opportunities to utilize intangible cultural heritage and living heritage stories around sports of all kinds, I think is massive and something that can really be encouraged to ensure that museums stay relevant.
Thank you so much, Jacob. And I noticed that Fran has rejoined us, so I'm going to hand back over to Fran.
Thanks, Justine. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground there. There's obviously masses of opportunity, which we're all fully aware of, and it's just working out how we can implement that. And just picking up on some of the points that have been raised, if you want to find out more about the Rugby League project that Becky referred to, Julia Lee, who's been heading up that project, has chaired our Representing Diversity in Sport and Sporting Heritage session as part of this year's conference. And touching on that sort of sense of place that Jacob's just been mentioning, if you watch one of the other webinars within this series, we talk to a number of sporting organisations about where heritage fits within their sites, and they talk a lot about how to create that sense of place for those who visit either on match days or on educational trips. So this webinar is part of our series of 4 hour-long themed webinars for this year's conference. They will all be accessible on the Sporting Heritage website alongside our 2 keynote speakers, who are Karen Debray from Lewes Football Club. And if you're not aware of the work that they've been doing there, they are the only football club in the country where the budget is split equally between the men's and the women's team. So they're a small club doing revolutionary things. And also Debbie Cooper from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, who gives us a real feel for where sport fits into that sort of national funding landscape. It just remains for me to say thank you to Justine for chairing the session, and to Andrew, Becky, David and Jacob for their participation today. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.